So I was online doing my normal reading when I came across something that actually really blew me away. Apparently, Gen Z thinks that in order to achieve financial stability, you need to have an annual income of $171,633 every year. And obviously I was shocked because $171,000 a year is a fantastic income. But it also made me realize this would be great for an exercise for a video. So for this video, I'm essentially going to be building a life or a budget for someone who's making $171,000 a year. We're going to see exactly what that looks like. What is their house like? What is the car they drive like? What is the breakdown of their budget going to look like? And then we're going to take that and discuss. And I'm going to share my thoughts on if $171,000 really is the baseline for achieving financial stability. And I'm gonna try as hard as I can to be as unbiased as possible because I wanna see if this is actually the case. So let's see if there's any truth to this or if Gen Z just has unrealistic expectations when it comes to financial stability. So before we dive into the numbers and the analysis, let's just go over a couple assumptions. First of all, I'm going to assume that this is just referring to household income. So this income does not have to come from one individual earner. And with that, I'm also gonna make the assumption that this income is made up of two earners. So we're gonna build out the budget based on the assumption that everything is for two people. Because Gen Z is still relatively young, we're gonna assume that there's not any kids in the picture quite yet. And we also need to settle on location because the cost of lifestyle varies greatly depending on where you decide to live. I didn't wanna pick an extremely high cost of living area because those are outliers. It's gonna make it seem like $171,000 is nothing. So I wanted to stay away from that. But on the flip side, I also did not want to pick somewhere that's extremely low because that's a very small percentage of actual people and it's probably not applicable to a lot of people. So we wanted to go somewhere right in the middle. And I was trying to think of cities that would be a good fit and my mind kept going to Dallas, Texas. Now, Dallas, Texas is a large city within the US, so the cost of living is definitely going to be higher than somewhere that's more remote. But for such a big city, it seems to have stayed relatively affordable. And it also seems to have a somewhat decent job market. So it's plausible to imagine two people working in this area bringing in a household income of $171,000 a year. Again, I'm not saying that's the norm. I'm just saying it's possible. Okay, we now know the makeup of the household and we know where it's located. So it's time to dive into the numbers. But first, I also just wanted to make the assumption that you are subscribed to the channel. And if you're not, make sure you go and hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out and I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. But anyway, moving on, let's break down our income. Again, our hypothetical couple is making $171,633 per year. And before we go any further, I wanna know exactly what their take-home pay is gonna be. So after you take out all of their taxes and deductions, what are they actually gonna be left with to budget with? And first, before we even look at taxes, we're actually gonna look at retirement investing right off the bat. And we're doing this because retirement investing is likely gonna be taken right out of our paycheck and placed in a 401k. And we're doing this before taxes because the amount we contribute to retirement is actually gonna impact how much taxes we owe. So anyway, if you're making this much money, I feel pretty passionately that you should be investing at least 20% of your income towards your retirement. You definitely should have the margin in your budget that you can make this work at such a high income. So that's the number we're gonna use in this video. And with that, 20% of our hypothetical income is gonna come out to $34,326. And let's assume that we're gonna contribute this to a traditional 401k, meaning that that amount is deductible from our taxable income. So once we subtract those calculations from our income and then we end up paying our income tax, we would have an effective tax rate of 15.82% with total taxes of $27,150 every year. So this means that once we've done all of our retirement investing, once we've paid all of our taxes, we now have a take-home income of $110,157 per year. And that comes out to $9,179 a month. So in case that was a lot and you got kind of lost there, just to summarize, after we've invested for retirement, after we pay taxes, we now have $9,179 a month to build our hypothetical budget in life. And as we start building this hypothetical life with $171,000 per year, what better way to start than with the biggest expense we could face, which is housing. If we're pulling in this much money, I'm going to assume that you're gonna purchase your home. This is definitely not a requirement. If you want to rent and you want to get a cheaper apartment, you can definitely still do that. But with this income, you should be able to purchase a home if you want to. So for fun, I went over to Zillow to check out some houses in the area. But before we dive into that, let's just go over some quick guidelines and parameters on actually purchasing a home. Overall, I think that when you're purchasing a home, you should aim to have your mortgage payment be less than 25% of your after-tax income. So if we ignore our retirement investing and we just look at how much money we make after only paying taxes, our annual income would be roughly $136,932. Broken down monthly, this would be $11,411 a month, meaning that we want to aim to have a mortgage payment no higher than $2,852 every month. And now I know what you're thinking, and yes, I can acknowledge that buying a home today is not nearly as affordable as it was just a few years ago. And I acknowledge that my parameters on buying a home are extremely conservative. I just don't want you to end up in a position where you're house poor, where you're having a hard time making your budget work just because you've allocated too much of your budget towards your monthly mortgage payment. And we should be able to find something nice in the Dallas area with the parameters we've set. So anyway, back to Zillow. And now I'm definitely not an expert on the Dallas housing market, but I definitely tried to look for nicer neighborhoods that seem realistic to live in. And I found a couple examples of homes that seem nice and fit within our parameters. House number one is located in a suburb northeast of Dallas. It has 4 bedrooms and is a little over 2,500 square feet, so it's not a bad size. And it seems like a good option, but it may be a little too much house for just 2 adults with no kids. Now, if you eventually wanted kids, then maybe you're planning ahead and it would be a great fit. If we look at the estimated monthly mortgage payment for this house, it comes out to $2,878, which is only like $26 over our parameters, so we're gonna say this counts. But let's also look at something a little smaller just because, again, there's only 2 people living in this household. House 2 is a smaller townhome located closer to Plano, but it's still within close range of Dallas. You could still commute there if you needed to. It is a much smaller house with only 2 bedrooms and it's 1,200 square feet. The outside is showing some slight signs of aging, but the inside looks pretty nice. And it could be a great option if you wanted something smaller, cheaper, and with less maintenance. And the estimated mortgage payment is $2,325, so this is well within our budget. There are thousands of other houses in the Dallas area that we could look at and analyze, and they would all differ in size and in price. But I just wanted to show you a couple examples of what can be purchased on an income of $171,000 a year. And remember, my parameters are extremely conservative. If you go do a house affordability calculator online or you talk to pretty much anyone else, I think you'll find that they're gonna say you can afford a lot more house than what we just went over, but you just have to be careful. Again, you don't want to be house poor. It all just comes down to what you're comfortable with. And you need to have realistic expectations. If you're expecting to buy a 5,000 square foot fancy house on this income in today's housing market, then you may be disappointed when you actually get out there and start looking. But you should be able to find something that's comfortable and that's stable. So for this exercise, let's just assume that we maxed out my parameters and we have a mortgage budget of $2,852 every month. Once we subtract that from our monthly take-home pay, we now have $6,326 left over to work with. And again, I'm trying to stay unbiased, but I can already see that this income is gonna be much more than what is actually necessary to have a financially stable life. I think we're gonna be able to be financially stable with less money than this, but let's keep going. All right, next, let's go to likely the next most expensive part of your budget, which is gonna be your car and your car insurance. All right, if you're making this much money, a great option would be for you to buy your car straight up with cash. But we need to find a way to add this to our monthly budget. So we are gonna assume that you financed your car, but because you listen to this channel, then you use the 23-8 rule that the Money Guy Show teaches, which states that if you do finance a car, you put down at least 20%, you get a loan that's no longer than 3 years, and you have a monthly car payment that's no more than 8% of your gross monthly income. Now, because you have such a high income, 8% of your income is gonna come out to a little over $1,100, which is expensive. So just watch out when you're looking at rules like this when your income gets higher and higher, because the proportions start to get a little bit out of whack. But because we have 2 people here, let's just keep going with the example. Let's say you purchased a car that's worth $25,000. Well, you would have a car payment that's somewhere around $600 a month using the 23-8 rule. And we do have 2 people here, so we're gonna assume that you buy 2 cars, and that's gonna bring your total monthly payment to $1,200. So we're a little higher than 8%, but I just wanna keep the numbers clean just for the sake of the calculation, but we're kind of within that ballpark anyway. And a $1,200 monthly car payment freaking hurts. So hopefully you just buy your cars in cash and avoid this. I'm not advocating for you financing your vehicles. I just wanted to break it down into a monthly budget to see what that's gonna look like for most people. But let's add that $1,200 to our expenses. And now we have $5,126 left over. We also have to factor in car insurance. According to Bankrate, the average cost of car insurance in the United States is $193 per month. If we multiply that for 2 people, it comes out to $386 per month, lowering our available monthly income to $4,740. Now I'm realizing now as I'm filming, I actually forgot to include gas in my budget. I don't know how I forgot to do that. So I'm gonna include that a little later in the video, so I'll make sure to include that, so just hang on. I also forgot to remind you to hit that subscribe button. Again, really helps out the channel. I really appreciate it, and that's the last time I'll ask, so thank you. All right, now that we have the big expenses out of the way, like our taxes, our housing, our car payments, and even our retirement investing, and after all that, we still have $4,740 left over to make up the rest of our budget. And we're gonna start with necessities, which are really just things that we need to survive. Now, before I jump into that, I'm not gonna do like the lowest amount possible. So keep in mind, if you have a lower income and you're really trying to pinch pennies and save, you're maybe potentially trying to get out of debt, you can spend a lot less money on each of these categories. But given their income, we're gonna assume they spend a little bit more, and it's not gonna be the lowest amount that I could allocate for each category. We're gonna up it in some places, just to show you what this looks like. So as we go to the categories, let's start out with food. And with food, I think that $150 every week for 2 people is a fairly generous food budget. Again, if you're really pinching pennies, you can go lower than this. But I think this amount seems reasonable given the hypothetical amount of money this couple's making. So that would bring our total monthly food budget to $600, lowering our available income to $4,140 a month. If you want to eat out or if you want to spend more money on food at the grocery store, then that can come out of your wants. But I wouldn't call those necessities that we need to include in this part of the budget. And food is not the only thing that we need at the grocery store. We also just need basic household items needed to run the house. So this is things like toilet paper, soap, cleaning supplies. And I think $50 a week should be more than adequate for this. Again, if you want to spend more than that, just put it in your wants. So that comes out to $200 a month, bringing our monthly available income to $3,940. All right, next up we have what I consider the sneaky part of the mortgage, which is utilities. And I think utilities are sneaky because no one ever talks about them when they're considering the cost of home ownership. And when you're moving somewhere new, it's actually really hard to get an estimate on what these utilities might be. So you don't really know what they're gonna cost you, but you are required to pay them to live in the house, assuming you want, basic electricity and water. In my experience, I think $200 a month is a good budget when it comes to utilities. Again, it depends on the area, and it's also gonna fluctuate on month to month as the weather changes, as your use of the utilities changes, so it really just depends. But for now, we're just gonna put $200 a month. And our available income every month now lowers to $3,740. All right, moving down the list of necessities, let's go to internet. Now, you don't technically need the internet to survive, but in today's day and age, I would definitely consider having internet access at home a necessity, as it's pretty much what our world runs on. I think it would be really difficult to be a functioning member of society without internet access. And when it comes to internet, this is not an endorsement, but I love Google Fiber, so we're gonna put this couple on a 1 gig Google Fiber plan. That's gonna cost them $70 a month, lowering their available monthly income to $3,670 a month. All right, and the next one is similar, but this one is gonna be our phone bill. Now, for the people who are looking for lower options on their phone, you could go with a prepaid phone plan with one of these new companies like Mint or Boost Mobile, and you could save a bunch of money. But I still think that most people go with the traditional carrier, so that's what we're gonna use for this example. Now, I was just looking online and I saw that the base unlimited plan on Verizon for 2 people is $110 a month. So that's what we're gonna use here, lowering our available monthly income to $3,560. All right, and this one's scary, but this one is health insurance. And this is the last necessity we're gonna talk about as far as the budget goes. And this is probably the hardest one to make an assumption for, just because everyone's situation differs so much. It just depends on what type of health insurance you need. It depends on if you work a corporate job where most of your monthly premiums are paid for you, or if you're self-employed, so you have to pay for your health insurance completely yourself. So it just depends. But as I was searching online, according to kff.org, the average cost of health insurance for one person is $702 a month. But we are gonna make the assumption here that half of that is covered by your employer. It's possible and even likely that more of that is covered by your employer, but I just wanna be conservative here because I know everyone's situation is different. So that means that the total cost for 2 people would come out to $702 a month. Again, lowering our available income to $2,858. And don't let me forget gas. Like I said in the car section, I said I would come back and make sure I add gas to our budget because that is a pretty big budget item and most people need gas to get around in the United States. Hopefully you bought fuel efficient cars so you can save money here, but let's be conservative and reasonable. I'm gonna give each person $50 a week for gas. I don't think I spend even close to that much on gas, but again, this is just something that's dependent on situation. So 50 times 2, that's $100 a week. So that comes out to $400 a month on gas. And now our available income left over is $2,458. And wow, that's it for our necessities. While we still have a couple grand left over after all of that, it's really easy to see how all of those small purchases add up, especially when we make upgrades here and there. Keep in mind that there was some very real lifestyle creep that happened while we were building out this budget. We got expensive cars, we bought a house, we got the nicer phone plan, we went for Google Fiber internet. Again, these are all decisions that seem small in the moment, but they do add up. So just keep in mind, you can keep a lot of categories cheaper if you want to. But that does leave $2,458 left over, and this money is gonna be left for additional savings and wants. I put savings first because savings is definitely more important. And I'm not gonna dive in specifically because both of these just depend from person to person, but what you do need to do is sit down and do some planning. First, we would need to identify our savings goals. Are we planning any big trips or vacations that we need to save for? Do we want to do additional investing? Are we planning to have kids or do we have kids and we want to invest in their education? Do we want more clothes or furniture? Etc. The list goes on and on. But figure out what your savings goals are, put a portion of this money towards those, and then the rest of it can be for wants. If you've saved or invested a portion of this money for the future, you added some to a vacation fund, you invested a little bit of it, I think you'll find that you actually have a lot of money to go around for some of these additional goals. And if you want more money for these wants or goals, you can always cut down on the necessities categories that we went over earlier. So what are my thoughts on all of this? Well, after going through this exercise, I definitely think Gen Z is a bit misguided when it comes to their income requirements on what it means to have a financially stable life. Like I said, with this income, I think we could have cut down on every single category and saved even more money than we ended up with after we made our budget. For example, we could have just rented a nice apartment instead of purchasing a home. We could have opted for a prepaid phone plan, could have lowered our grocery bill, and we definitely didn't need to buy those $25,000 cars. Those are things that fit in our budget, but they were definitely luxuries. And even with those, we still had $2,500 left over at the end of the month. And like I said, we could have made that number substantially bigger. So I think $171,000 is more than enough to be financially stable. You can find financial stability on much less than that amount. Now, that being said, I was surprised to see how quickly that income dropped as we were going through the different categories of our budget. Each budget item seems small on their own, and I didn't really think too much about any of them, but they all really add up over time. It's crazy that we started with over $9,000, and by the time we got to the end of our budget, we were down to roughly $2,500 left over. So this should definitely be a cautionary tale of lifestyle creep. If you keep upgrading your house, buying new cars, and just adding small incremental additions to your budget, you'll find that your money is leaving your wallet much quicker than you expect. So while I think that you can find financial stability on much less than $171,000 per year, it's actually easy to understand why people who do make that amount of money struggle so much with their budget. It all just comes down to living below your means, budgeting, investing, and taking control of your finances. But that's gonna do it in this video. Do you agree with Gen Z? Do you think you need to make at least $171,000 to be financially stable? Do you think that you could be financially stable with less than that? I want to hear about it. Let me know, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.